Okay, so first let's look at the quiz. Did anybody have any specific questions about the quiz?
I did not.
No? Any specific questions about, we're going to go over the results, but was there something that I can help you understand better before we go over the results that you are like having issues with? If not, let's jump right to it. Okay, so for this one, let's just go question by question. The three sections we talked about, specifically we talked about the room revenue differential, but today we're going to talk about food and beverage and the other revenue. So that was on the slides, introducing in part one, introducing the displacement analysis. So those are the three parts. We didn't really talk about labor analysis at this point. The transient, okay, so if the group is going to displace transient 100% good, 100% there. We talked about the rooms revenue differential. This is one that a couple people got hung up on. And so the room costs, this $35.73 is going to primarily include just the franchising fee and the variable cost, okay? So that's the variable cost. I believe in this case it was $25, and then plus whatever the fees were as a percentage, okay? And so this room cost right there includes both that, and all that information is given to you at the very top of your displacement analysis. Room revenue, we need to subtract the room cost, good 100%. This one, I think I might go ahead and throw out this question just because the responses are all over the place. Maybe is how I wrote the question. That might be a little bit confusing. But essentially, the key word that we're looking here in this question is we're talking about group revenue, okay? And so if we're talking about group revenue, this question, the total group requested rooms by the requested rate, we can't use the requested rate because we haven't subtracted all of our costs out of that yet, okay? We can't do the total displaced by the group rate because we're looking for the net group revenue. So in this case, it's saying the total displaced. So that's not a good one. Multiply the total group requested rooms by the projected ADR. That one right there isn't good in the sense that the projected ADR is related to the transients. The group is typically going to request a lower rate or a specific rate. And so the projected ADR always refers to the transient guests. Any questions about that one? Okay.
I think that one for me, when I was looking at the slideshow, it didn't show like how to actually solve that one. So all the other ones where it asked you how to calculate it, the slideshow showed, like it said what it to do to like add it or whatever, but this one didn't.
Okay, I can go back and look at that. And again, I thought maybe because this one was worded interestingly, I'm gonna go ahead and toss that question out anyway, so I'll give everybody credit for that one question. Mm-hmm. This next one, the question is asking, how many potential displaced guests will you have if you accept this group? Remember, if there's ever a negative number, that negative number becomes an imaginary zero, okay? And so because of that, we won't have any potential guests displaced. And so even though the number comes out negative 25, the answer would still be 0, okay, not negative 25. 100% on that one, good. This one, I don't know exactly what the something else is, but I'm assuming it's going to be something in related to one of these that's going to be a negative number, okay? So 200 plus 100 is what?
$300.
Thank you, 300 minus 350 gives us a?
Negative 50.
Negative 50, okay? 250 plus 105 is 355. Okay, we subtract our 350 and what do we get?
5.
Good. And then 275 plus 105 is our 380 minus 350 gives us
30.
Okay. Now, a couple of students have reached out to ask me how to solve this one. I think some people potential answers were negative 15 because they just simply added all the way across. Okay. But remember, when there's a negative number, that means we're not displacing anybody. And so go ahead and write over that and just do 0, or simply just cross it out and only focus on what is positive. Okay. And so go ahead and write the negative number, and that way you'll see that it's negative, and then just disregard it when you're actually calculating what the total displaced is going to be. Don't try to just leave it in your head as a 0. Go ahead and actually write the negative number. Right. So then we had something else on this one. Let's figure out this one right here. Okay. So 1250 plus 300 is 1550. So what's our transient displaced?
50.
Okay. And then 1250 plus 450 gives 1700. So that's a displace of
200.
Okay. And then 1250 plus 450 again is going to be another 200.
200.
Okay. I'm not sure what the something else is, but if you had a question about that, then we just add all the ways across and we get 450. Okay. If you had a question, if you missed that one, I can go back and look and see, but if you had a specific question about that, then just let me know, and I can help you work that out. All right, 90%. We want to so now we move away from the group revenue, and we're focusing now solely on the net displaced revenue. And so again here, the keywords to look for is the net revenue by the total displaced, okay? So whatever that net revenue, we can't just do the ADR because the ADR hasn't taken into account any of the costs, okay? We want to take out the cost associated with each one to get our net revenue per room. And then we're gonna multiply that by that. The keyword that's missing or that's incorrect in the first response is the group, because we're looking for our net displaced for displaced rooms, and that we can't use the group request for that. All right, and then the last thing, we want to make sure that we're subtracting the net displaced from the net revenue. We don't want to add those two together. We want to actually subtract. It's always important to understand that we always do the displaced revenue from the net group revenue. That way we get the correct answer. Any questions, comments, concerns about that?
Nope.
Okay, so let's then go on to the second half of the chapter. Let's do attendance. Let me update attendance real quick. Anna is here. Sandra is here. Alfred's here. Who's on their iPhone? It doesn't have a name.
I'm on my iPhone.
Yep, I got you, Danny. There's someone else.
Okay.
It's me, Paula.
Paula. Okay, thank you, Paula. Perfect. I don't see Rebecca, Michaela, Marina, Keegan, or Ana Villarreal yet. Okay, cool. So we have to update that attendance later. Part 3.
Claudia, move all of that stuff over here with Miss Thelma, or over here where you're at.
Let's see.
Okay, move the stuff that they gave over here. Give it to Miss Thelma.
Yeah, give it to me. All right.
Let me stop my share screen. There we go. There we go. Okay. So minimize this. Okay. Let's see. All right. Let's go into PowerPoint. Okay, so now you're seeing my PowerPoint, correct?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. So now we talked about the room revenue. Today we're going to talk about the displacement analysis from the food and beverage perspective of it. Do you see my PowerPoint as a full screen now instead of just the slides?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I just want to make sure it transferred over. Okay, so with just like the room revenue, the transient guests are going to pay one rate for their rooms, and the group is going to request a different rate. We want to figure out what the net revenue, so subtracting kind of any costs that are involved with those to establish what that net revenue is for the rooms. We're going to do the same thing for the food and beverage as well. Okay, both transient guests and the groups are going to consume food and beverages more than likely. They're going to do it at different quantities, at different rates, and usually at different prices as well. And so that's one reason why we look at the various different costs involved with the different things that as far as food and beverage. Okay. Typically, the groups are still going to spend more money than the transient guest will, more often than not, and so you'll usually see a positive number here in this category. And then oftentimes too, when we're dealing with groups, we have established a food and beverage minimum. So for example, a group that I was working with a couple years ago, they were coming to San Antonio in 2018. One of the planners really wanted to have our meeting at the La Cantera Resort, which is a beautiful property and it's wonderful. It would be great to have it out there. However, our entire conference budget was $25,000, and the resort required a $20,000 plus minimum food and beverage. So 20,000 plus. Anybody know what plus stands for?
No.
Any ideas of what plus might stand for?
It could mean that you have to spend it in 2 other areas of income.
Not quite. That's a good guess, but not quite. Anybody else? So we're talking about spending, $20,000 plus. Or let's say we're looking at our catering menu, and the catering menu for the chicken dish is going to be $35 plus per person. That plus means tax and gratuity. Okay, so typically it's anywhere between 18 to 20% gratuity, and then plus the sales tax. So yeah, the food and beverage minimum is $20,000, but when you take into account the plus, granted this organization was tax exempt, sales tax exempt. So even times the 20% food and beverage gratuity, that's $24,000 that is required to be spent. If that food and beverage is not that minimum is not met, typically then the hotels or the resorts will then charge for room rental fees for their meeting space and things like that. So a lot of times hotels and hotels and resorts, conference centers, they'll charge that food and beverage minimum, and then they'll throw in complimentary use of their meeting space. Okay, so the things that we're going to be looking at, we're going to go through these one by one. But primarily, we're going to be looking at our menu prices, so essentially how much we sell our food for, what the food cost percentage is, and how to calculate that, the contribution margin. So the same thing when we have our contribution margin, when we talked about identical net revenue for hotel rooms, the same concept applies here. It's whatever we're selling it for minus the food cost to get what our contribution margin is. And then the last thing, we're going to talk about how we evaluate the transient capture rate. Okay, so this pyramid, this triangle, if you've had me for food and beverage cost control, you might have seen this. If you have not taken food and beverage cost control, you will see this again. But the menu price and the food cost percentage, essentially our food cost percentage is the percentage of which the cost of those ingredients are as they relate to what we sell our item for, okay? Typically, we are looking at hotels, restaurants in general, are looking at anywhere between a 30 to 33% food cost percentage. Okay, that's what we kind of want to maintain. And so if we can maintain that 30 to 33%, that means that 30 to 33% of what we sell it for just covers the cost of the food to make it, okay? Just the cost of the ingredients. Beverages typically are lower percentages. That's where we make a lot more profit. But essentially, the higher the percentage is, the less profit we are making, all right? And so this is a really useful tool that you can utilize to help you practice calculating our food costs, the food cost percentage, and what we actually should sell it for, okay? And the way that you manipulate this tool is whatever you are looking for, that's the category that you're going to cover up, okay? So for example, if we're looking for our food cost, okay, if we take our food cost and we black that out, that's what we're looking for, what two categories remain?
Food cost and menu price, percentage.
The food cost percentage and the menu price. Oh my goodness, I just realized something. I have this backwards. Let me see if I can fix this, hold on.
Oh, the divide and the multiply?
Yeah, divide and multiply are different.
Yeah.
They're switched. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay, so that. This item is going to be yellow. This line is going to be red.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. Okay, let's go back.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Did you say the higher the percentage, the lower the revenue when it comes to this pyramid?
The higher the percentage, the lower the profit.
Lower the profit. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the higher the percentage, the lower the profit, meaning it costs us more money in relation to what we're selling it for.
Okay.
So we're going to get less net revenue from that particular item. Okay. Now, is that always it? So that this is like a kind of a good example. A friend of mine works at a steakhouse, and his servers get really excited when they sell a lobster dinner because the lobster dinner is so expensive, right? It's a high ticket item. but it also has a really high cost to it as well. So it's a higher cost percentage. And so it's great to sell the lobster dinners, but it's for the servers because they get tips usually based on percentage of the sales of the check. But for the restaurant, it's also good to push sides because side dishes have a lower food cost percentage. When I said, we're looking at a 30 to 33% food cost, that's an overall food cost percentage. Okay, we can't sell everything at 30 to 33% because that would price some items way out of the customer's budget. Okay, and so that 30 to 33% is an average total. Some items, typically your proteins are going to have a higher food cost percentage, and then the lower ones are going to be where you're going to make up that difference. You're going to make up that money. Okay, when we're talking about meal periods, typically breakfast has the lowest and dinner has the highest percentages, okay? Because of the proteins that are usually involved with that, okay? Breakfast typically has the lowest percentages and then dinner has the highest and lunch is somewhere in between. So let's do a couple practice with this, using this tool. Okay, so somebody give me a menu item, like an entree you would order out at a restaurant.
Steak.
Steak, okay. Gotcha, okay, so we've got steak. What would you normally pay for that steak, the menu price?
$21.
$21, okay. Because this is a higher menu item, like a higher cost ingredient, we're going to go ahead and go with a 33% food cost. Okay, food cost percentage. So if we're looking for our food costs, we cover that up, and what's left over is $21 times 0.33. Okay, it's important to put this as a decimal. And that's going to tell you what we need to, what our food cost essentially is going to be. So in this case, what would our food cost be?
$6.93.
Good, $6.93. Okay.
Some
So
good
that's
profit.
the cost of the steak just to make that item. Okay. If we had side dishes, we might also include that as an ingredient cost as well. But looking at just a steak, $6.93 would be the cost. This is why it's very difficult, or not very difficult, why I typically don't like to order salads when I go out to eat. They say add a salad for $3.50, and I'm like, okay, that salad that you're going to bring out to me maybe costs you maybe 50 cents, 75 cents. And I can go and buy all of these ingredients and make 100 salads for $3.50. Maybe not 100, that's exaggerating. But so oftentimes when I'm going out to eat, I'm thinking, okay, I know how much this costs to produce. And so of course I don't have to wash the dishes. I don't have to actually do the preparation. So I'm saving time and all that stuff. But once you understand this concept of the food cost percentage, sometimes it kind of makes it a little bit challenging to when I go out, because I'm just like, oh, I don't really want to order this and pay for this because I know how much it actually costs, or I have an idea of how much it usually costs. So this is how this works. So let's do a different example. Let's say our food cost, let's go the different direction. Let's say our food cost is $4.50. And we want to maintain a 30% food cost. So now we're looking at what should we sell this item for? So if you cover up that menu price, what's left over is $4.50 divided by 0.3.
$15.
At 15?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So $4.50 divided by 0.3, you'll notice that I left that 0 off. because that's an imaginary 0. You can put the 0 if you want, by all means. If it makes you feel more comfortable to type in an extra 0 in your calculator, you can totally do that, but it's not necessary. So $15. So we can go different directions. We can actually cost out a recipe, figure out what it's going to cost, and then apply that food cost percentage. And then that is what gives me my selling price, my menu price. Okay. So, I mean, a lot of hotels, they already have catering menus already created that have the price per person because all this stuff has been done. If you have a client and if you have a chef that it's at the hotel and he or she likes to be really creative and try new things, and you have a client who wants to order off of the catering menu, well, this is how you get an opportunity to cost out things that are off of the catering menu. So if that's the case, then you as a salesperson need to make sure that you give your chef plenty of time to actually cost out that recipe. You can't just demand things right off, really quickly. Give them give them enough time that they can calculate that effectively. The other thing that when we're talking about from the sales perspective, we're looking at, we want to make sure that we are not promising chicken, or sorry, let me flip that. We're not promising like filet mignon on a chicken budget. Okay, so if the hotel can only go so far, can only go so low on their prices for food and beverage, just like we can only go so low on our rate for our guest rooms. The same thing is true with the food and beverage side. Questions about this? Let's do one more. Oh, just kidding. Yeah, let's do one more. Okay, so we've done food cost and menu price. Now let's do food cost percentage. Oops. So somebody give me a menu price.
$33.
$33. Okay. And let's say our food cost is $12 to produce that meal. Okay. So in this case, that division line right here acts as a division symbol. So now we take $12 divided by $33, and what do we get?
That's pretty high food cost.
36%.
36%? Okay, so 0.36.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
363636.
Okay, so 363636. So in this case, we move our decimal place over 2 spaces, and we actually get 36.4%. Okay. It is okay to have 1 decimal place when you're talking about percentages. Okay, just like our occupancy percentage, it's okay to have 1 decimal place. It's okay to do that because 36.4%, in this case, we're talking about $12 compared to $33. But if we're talking about $1 million, that 0.4% is going to make a huge difference. So the larger the numbers that we're comparing, the more of a difference it's going to make. And so we want to make sure we have at least 1 decimal place. Okay, so this is a high food cost percentage. It's above that 30 to 33%. Okay, but that's essentially how you use this tool. So you cover up what you're looking for, and what's left is 12 divided by 33. Okay, questions, comments, concerns about how to use this tool, because it's going to become very handy as you move throughout this portion.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
So going back to the pyramid, if you're looking for one of the bottom, you're going to divide. If you're looking for the top, you're going to, no, if you're looking for one of the bottom acrossways, you're going to multiply. But if you're looking for the top, you're going to divide. I'm not sure when to do the division or the multiplication.
Okay, so how we manipulate this tool.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say, so give me one of the 3 categories that you're looking for. Give me one of the 3.
I want to know what price I should charge.
Okay, so you want to know what your menu price is.
Yes.
Okay, so you cover that up, and you can actually use your finger to actually physically cover that up.
Yes.
And what's remaining is food cost divided by food cost percentage.
Okay, so if you're looking at one, if you're trying to find, if the top number is in your equation, you divide. Is that right?
So rather than trying to figure out, like, say top and bottom, just actually call it by the category.
Okay.
Okay. So if I'm looking for the menu price, if that's my question mark, then what's remaining is the cost divided by the percentage.
Got it.
If
Same thing if I do the food cost, it's going to be if I want to know the percentage, it's going to be the cost divided by the menu.
Exactly. So if I look for food cost, what's remaining is the cost divided by price.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
And then lastly, if I'm looking for the food, what my food cost is, then what's remaining is the cost times the menu price.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cool.
Yes.
You're welcome. Okay, so then we have our contribution margin, which we all know is just what we sell it for minus our food costs. Okay, so what was one of the examples we had? 12 and 33. So if we took our selling price of $33 and we subtract our $12, what is our contribution margin?
Is that pretty much like profit?
Well, okay, so the profit, this is our contribution margin of $21, okay? That contribution margin is going to cover any of our fixed costs and our profit. So our profit is included in there. So the lower we can keep our costs, then the better. But remember the contribution margin, the root word is contribute. And so whatever this contribution margin is contributes to covering our fixed costs and then also goes towards our profit.
Yeah, like labor and making the food and all that.
Yeah, so that's that $21 labor to make the food, the utilities, the rent of the building, the labor to serve the food, all of that's going to come out of that $21 for that meal. And then whatever's left over is the net profit, what you actually take home. Okay. And so essentially what we're looking for here is removing that, just the cost of the food, to take that out, to get whatever our net price is, our net revenue per meal that we serve. Okay, so now let's talk about our transient capture rate. So with our groups, the food and beverage with our groups is a little bit more predictable, because if I'm having a banquet, the group is going to, in their contract, they're going to say, we're going to serve 50 people during breakfast in the morning. Okay, so it's it's more predictable with the group side. The transient side is less predictable, and we always express that as a percentage. Okay, and so essentially what that means. So let's look right here where I've put 40% capture rate. Okay, so a 40% capture rate just means that we can look at our past data as guests come into our restaurant or guests come into our hotel to eat. We can determine, are they transient guests or are they members of a group? Okay, and all of that information is going to be included in the guest folio. So when you go to a hotel and you register, and you're making your reservation, and they ask, is this travel for business or pleasure? Okay, pleasure is traditionally a leisure guest, or personal travel is our leisure guests, and then the group travel is business guests. Or specifically, if there's a group in-house, then we can determine if a group like someone that's attending the conference, the meeting is actually part of the group because it's put into their folio, into their guest account history. Okay, and so what we can look at is our past data to figure out, you know, on average, what percentage of our sales or what percentage of our groups in our transient guests in house are actually eating in our restaurants, or eating breakfast in our hotel, or eating dinner, or having a drink at the bar. We can determine all of that information based on what our property management system is, the data that it's gathering. And so that's why it's typically represented as a percentage rate. And so from here, what we need to look at is what our total displaced was when we first figured out our room revenue. We take that same number, and then we take the revenue, the net revenue per meal, which we're going to go over. We just talked about the contribution margin, okay? And then we multiply by our capture rate. So in this case, how many people are displaced? The example we have here on the slide.
150.
Okay, so you have 150 displaced. And then we multiply that by $7.50. That's our net revenue per meal. And then we take it one step further and we multiply it by 40%. Okay, so we take all of that together, 150 times 750 times 0.4 gives me a total net revenue. Okay, so of those 150 that are displaced, our records show, our data shows that 40% of them are going to eat in our restaurant. And we take our net revenue, we take out that cost, and so we multiply our 150 times 40% times 750. Because it's multiplication, you can do it in any order. It doesn't matter which order you do it in because it's all multiplication. Okay, any questions, comments, concerns about this? We're going to go through the actual example that I have on Canvas. So you'll see it like in the you'll see it in the format that you'll notice it in the Excel spreadsheet. But any questions about calculating this? Yes, Danny.
The 150 displaced, is that coming from, like, are we predicting the revenue from the amount of people over the amount that we had come in? Because I know that when we were talking about displaced in the rooms, that was like the oversold.
Exactly. So it's the same number. Whatever number you use for the room revenue differential, you're going to use that same number to calculate, because this is that revenue that if we displaced those 150 people, then that's the revenue that those 150 people would potentially bring in. Okay. And so it's the same idea. You're going to use that exact same number, and you'll see that in just a moment. Good question. All right. So then after we figure out, we'll do the same thing for beverages. And then once we figure out that, the last thing we're going to look at is our net revenue from other sources, okay, from all other sources. What are some examples of other revenue sources at the hotel? Golf, yes. Anybody else?
The spa.
The spa, good.
What about like the pantry or the sundry?
Yeah. I mean, we might have like some kind of like a little snack shop or whatever. So really kind of any other additional food and beverage outlets that are out there other than restaurants or meeting, like the meeting space, the banquets and things like that, or breakout spaces. Good. We might have valet parking. So that we might have that built into the group contract, that everyone that's coming is already going to get valet parking that's already covered. Let's see what else. Yep, gift shop, good. You know, we might do any kind of amenity drops. So there might be something that, you know, the group wants everybody at night to get, you know, each night that there's going to be something that's dropped in the room that's branded. It may be a vendor of the trade show wants to market their product, and so they're going to put a coffee mug filled with chocolates in everybody's room. Well, if we as the hotel are going to be dropping those in every room as an amenity, then we're going to charge them for that. So all these different opportunities for other revenue are going to go into consideration. Okay. Let's do our new share here. Okay. So this is the second page. Y'all are seeing my Excel spreadsheet, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the second page of our displacement analysis, okay? At the top, step number 1, we're going to add up the total group meals requested, okay? And so the groups are going to, based on whatever is happening, whatever functions they particularly need, they're going to request a certain number of meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, okay? So for this example here, we might just look at this and see, well, they're not going to have any breakfast in the first day because people probably aren't there yet, okay? Same thing with lunch, people probably aren't arriving, and so we might have what's called a welcome dinner. So we have all 45 guests, we're going to have a welcome dinner for all 45. And then we're going to have breakfast for everybody on the first day, we're going to have lunch for everybody, but we're not going to have dinner. We're going to do dinner somewhere else, okay? And then the same thing, we might do breakfast on this day. There might be, you know, an off-site lunch that's happening, and only 15 people are going to hang back, and we're going to make sure that those 15 people are fed, and then we'll have 40 people for a farewell dinner that night. Okay, so you can see the reason why I do this is so you can see that just because we have 65 people on the first day doesn't mean we always have 65 all the way across the board for all 3 meals. Same thing with the third day. Just because we have 40 guests doesn't mean that we are going to have 40 all the way across. Okay, so really it's whatever the group is needing for their food and beverage. Questions about that before we move on? So that's the first thing you want to do is kind of total up what the total breakfast, lunch, and dinner is going to be and the needs for that, okay? And then we move on to the math, okay? So for this case, primarily what you're going to be provided when you're going to do your displacement analysis is going to be the price and the food cost percentage. Okay, so these 2 things. And then you're going to fill out the remaining. Okay, and so for this example, let's just do a couple of these so you can see how this works. So for the breakfast example for number 1, if we have our triangle, and I recommend that you write your triangle every single time until you get the hang of this, okay? So write your triangle, and what are we looking for in this case?
Food cost.
Okay, good, the food cost. And so if we erase that food cost, what's remaining? Oops. What remains is the percentage times the menu price. Okay, and so if we do our percentage of 30% times $18, we will get $5.40. Questions about that? Okay, so here's where it gets a little tricky. So we're comparing this breakfast to the breakfast that the group is requesting, okay? Right here to the breakfast that the group is requesting. Now, Does it matter if I sell it for $18 or if I sell it for $15? Is it going to cost me any different?
No.
No, it's not. The food cost is going to remain the same. It's the exact same food, but the group is requesting a lower rate, which they typically will do. Okay. And so because of that, we want to look at taking this food cost, that's why number 3, where it says copy the food cost, directly down into the group meal request area. Okay, because these food costs right here are identical to these food costs here. Questions, comments, concerns about that? Because that's what hangs up a lot of people on this.
Yeah, I had a question because if you're doing 30% of the $18, they give us the
Can you get me that off the
$5.40.
printer?
Yeah, it gives you the $5.40.
And then
30%.
is this and you're saying the food cost is going to remain the same, but I know how you said if it goes to the $15, is that because we're just giving them like a $3 discount?
Exactly. They're
rather than it actually being the set cost, right?
Exactly. So think about it this way. For the menu price right here, $18 is like if we as guests went to the restaurant and paid $18 for breakfast. Okay. That's our bacon, our sausage, our eggs, our toast, and our coffee and our juice. Okay. Now, the group wants the bacon, egg, sausage, coffee, and juice, but they're requesting a $15 price instead.
Okay.
It still cost me $5.40 to make that breakfast, but they're asking for a lower price. Okay. And you'll see that one reason why we can offer that at a lower price is because the total revenue that's going to be coming in is going to be higher because there's typically more group guests like paying for that breakfast. The group is paid for that breakfast. It's more guaranteed business than projections of transient guests. Okay. And so that's the step 3. That's where a lot of people get confused, is that we copy that food cost directly over. Okay. And so right here in the blue, this is like off of our menu. And then in the red right here, this is what the group is requesting. Okay. So now that we've calculated our net revenue per meal for each group, okay, so now you'll see I kind of color coded things and kept it the same. So the group is green and the transient is blue, and the transient down here is blue. Okay. And so now that we know that our group menu for breakfast is $9.60 per person or per meal, and we go back up to the top and we had 105 for breakfast, then we just simply multiply the 105 times the $9.60, and that gives us our revenue. Okay. Same thing for lunch and dinner. So we just simply multiply across. We do a different.
And that's just a contribution, right?
Yeah, this net food revenue per meal, that's our contribution margin. Okay, $9.60. So we multiply across and we get our totals, and then we get our grand total here. Okay. The one thing that we're going to add to the transient is what? What do we add to the transient that we don't add on the group?
The capture rate.
Good, that capture rate. But remember, you can just simply multiply right across and you get that total amount. Okay.
And we do the capture rate because we know that's the percentage of our transient guests that's going to do that particular meal?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
You know, and it's interesting because in the hotels, like when I worked at the Sheraton Hotel, I worked at the restaurant, and we loved when it was a rainy day or a rainy night. And we loved it when it was rainy because that means people were going to eat in our restaurant. if we were we're downtown San Antonio. So a transient guest that's staying at our hotel typically wants to go eat at a local restaurant or go eat on the Riverwalk or things like that. And so, depending on the time of year, these percentages of the transient capture rate is going to depend on what the market is doing. So if you have, like a bunch of families in your restaurant, in your hotel during spring break or during summertime, and less group travel, then your capture rate might be higher. And so it's always important to go back and look at the data and figure out what that capture rate is so you can calculate this displacement analysis appropriately and use some good information for that. Okay, so then the last thing that we're going to do, real quick, we take this total for the group and this total for the transient, and just like we do for room revenue, we do group minus the transient. Okay, group minus the transient.
That capture rate for the breakfast, lunch, and dinner, is that always going to be given?
It will always be given. Yep.
Okay.
It sure will. Good question. Okay, so now let's move on to the beverages. Okay. So beverages is different from food. Okay, we calculate it separately. Typically, our beverages are going to have a much lower cost percentage, meaning it costs us less money, but we sell it at a higher rate, which means we make a little bit more profit. That's why we want to sell soda packages. That's why we want to sell breakout sessions, like a snack break that has coffee and soda and bottled water and cookies. Those things have a lower food cost percentage, but we can sell them at a higher rate and we'll make a little bit more profit, a little bit more contribution margin on those items, okay? So with the beverages, we do a capture rate for everybody. Okay, so you'll notice the different from the food, there's a capture rate for group and a capture rate for transient. Okay, the same thing applies. We just multiply straight across. Okay, to get our totals. With this capture rate, this tells me that I'm going to have 150 total guests, so basically 150 total room nights, and then 70% of those 150 room nights are going to order at least one drink. Okay, we may have a group that we know is going to, based on their past experience, whether they've been a repeat guest with a client with us, or based on their past history from their request for their proposal, they can, kind of give an idea of, or whether it's through conversations with that meeting planner, we can get an idea so we can make sure, we want to make sure that our bar is stacked. And staffed appropriately. If we know that a lot of their guests are going to come down to the bar at nighttime after the meeting's over or after the group dinner is over, they're going to come to the bar. We want to make sure that our bar is staffed. And so these are questions we're going to ask them as well. We also want to make sure that we have enough product in our bar in order to service the group, whether it's transient or the group. We always want to make sure that we have enough product in our bar. Okay, but in this case, we can use that capture rate. So questions about using that capture rate on the beverages. And again, we use that capture rate for the group and the transient. The last thing we're going to do, you'll have the, where you transfer all of your data, all of your information into here. And so we take our group food and our group beverages, we're going to add those things together. And that's going to give us our total for food and beverage. And then our last step is when we subtract these items. Okay, so we need to first add up our total food and beverage for each category, and then subtract the totals to give our total differential for food and beverage. So you can see our food and beverage a little bit more detailed and a little bit more intensive than the room revenue. Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns about this? Nope. Okay. The very last step then is the other revenue contributions. And then the very last, we add everything together here to get our total revenue differential between, so you'll see here we have our room revenue, we have our food and beverage that came down here, our other, and our total room revenue differential. Now, if we had something like spa, we could, in theory, we're not going to for the case of this example, but in theory, we could go back and look and see how many of our transient guests use the spa and what that cost is and compare that as well. Okay, so really there can be a displacement for everything possible, every part of this. And so we're gonna focus primarily on the room revenue, the food and beverage, and the other, but we're not gonna really extend the other. We're just gonna keep it just listed. So questions, comments, concerns about this?
And
I have a, oh, go ahead, Danny.
no, you first.
Okay, thanks. Just so I'm understanding the other revenue contributions, you wrote spa, but it could be anything. It could be golf, it could be spa, it could be, okay, so, but we're just not gonna break down what those are and do the whole.
Exactly.
Okay, that's all,
Yeah.
that was my question.
Exactly.
Okay, and I'm guessing we're using the total revenue differential, that 27,554, towards our reasonings on taking that displacement of 150 guests.
Exactly. Now, in this case, our total displaced was only 60.
Okay.
Okay, so if our total displaced is only 60 guests, would we consider taking this group if they're going to bring us in
An extra $27,000.
$27,500 if we're only going to displace 60 guests? So you really kind of have to figure out, this is where you as a revenue manager come in to play to say, yes, this is worth this business, or this is not worth this business. We need to make sure that we spend a certain dollar amount in food and beverage, increase it, or yes, we'll take this group, but really we, instead of a 145 rate, let's give them offer a 175 rate, knock $20 off instead of $50 off of our rate, and so this is where that negotiation time comes into play. And so as a salesperson, they have to work with the revenue manager to sign off on and to approve whether or not we take groups. Okay.
I have one more question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I know when we were talking about the 70 and 40%, what is it called, the capture rate for like the food, and we did all of our math because of it. Let's see, when we went up and it says the total group 150.
Yeah.
And the transient was 60.
Yeah.
For the total group, and the capture rate was there. Would they factor in all of our costs towards that number at the end to see if we're actually benefiting from a profit? Because I know.
Sorry, go ahead. Continue.
Because I know that they're going to be spending a lot more and using a lot more resources on food to make that profit, and if it's actually worth it or not.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the food, the cost to make the food is already incorporated in this $27,000 because it's incorporated up here as we take out our net revenue. Okay, so the cost to produce it, or sorry, the cost to of the ingredients is already taken into consideration. But like I think you were alluding to, the cost to make the food, the cost to serve it, the labor that's included. So yes, that also would be something to consider, because again, this is 27,000 net differential, but that doesn't include labor, It doesn't include the utilities, like the rent, the fixed cost. All of those things are different factors within that. That's a very good question. Yeah. So this is just kind of a very high level. Let's look at this and see. Now, if I was going to, let's say I had zero. Let's say I was going to displace 0 people. Would I consider taking this group of $27,000?
Oh, definitely.
Probably, right? But if I'm displacing, 1,000 people, which probably wouldn't never be the case, but let's say I'm displacing 200 people potentially over a week-long meeting, that $27,000 may not be worth it as much.
No.
And so there's not a definite yes just because it's positive we're gonna take this group. We always want to take into consideration a lot of other different factors, but this at least gives us a starting point to figure out, do I want to even consider taking this group? Okay. So questions, comments, concerns about this? All right, so let's do part 4. So let's just look on at these few slides relatively quickly. It's going to wrap up chapter 4. We've already talked a little bit about this. And so essentially, once we figure out all those different areas, the room revenue, the food and beverage, the other, this is going to give us that starting point to determine, do we accept this group, or what do we need to do to maybe increase our revenue? Thinking about what Matthew showed us when we were at the Weston Riverwalk Hotel. He showed those different, the pattern and see how the pattern and the flow goes throughout the week. And if this group is going to disrupt that pattern to where, let's say the group wants to come in on Saturday and they want to request too many rooms on Saturday, that's going to disrupt the flow of our transient guests. And it's going to affect whether or not our transient guests can stay Friday and Saturday and check out Sunday. If we take on this group, then we may not want to take this group. It might mess up that flow. Or if it's a traditionally slower period, we may want to take that group just to make sure we're receiving some revenue. So there's all these different factors to consider when we're thinking about, do we take this group? Just this displacement analysis gives us that very first kind of starting point to figure out that, okay? Just because a group is going to give us, we have a positive, sometimes it's very difficult to actually create a negative displacement analysis. The times that you're going to see that is traditionally in smaller hotels. Excuse me. In smaller hotels, it's difficult for them to, to guarantee. You have a 102 room hotel. It's difficult to take a group that is going to use up 50% of your rooms. Then that's going to, potentially lead to more displacement of transient guests. And so it's really challenging sometimes for smaller hotels to offer significant decreases. Especially if you're like a select service hotel that maybe has a small conference room. It might have a very small meeting space, large enough for 20, 30 people max. And so with that, if you have the smaller meeting space and you have a small number of rooms, like 100 or so rooms, it's really challenging because typically those hotels are also the ones who offer complimentary breakfast. They don't typically have a food and beverage outlet as far as a restaurant. They may offer catering of some sort in their meeting space, but it might be off-premise catering and things like that. So they're bringing that food in. So just because your displacement analysis comes back positive does not mean that you absolutely are going to take that group, okay? And then sometimes we will accept a group, give them a little bit of a discount because we know that they're going to come back on a regular basis. that they're going to be long-term repeat clients. And so in that case, looking at the big picture down the road, we might go ahead and offer a little bit of discounts or concessions to groups just because we know that we have that potential for a long-term client. Okay. Short term, we look at only the revenue. We look at only that revenue. So if we're looking short term and we're like, oh yeah, that group's going to bring us 35,000, that group's going to bring us 1.2 million. Yes, let's take that group. Okay. Strategic revenue management looks at the long term, looks at that big picture. Okay. We'll talk a little bit more about strategic revenue management in the coming chapters. Okay. And then one of the biggest things to consider is that if we displace too many of our transient guests that are our lifetime, like our high lifetime value guests, they come and they spend, they spend money in our restaurant, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They come on a regular basis. They come every holiday period or whatever. They're longtime value guests. If we take a group, there's always the potential that we might displace those particular guests. And so it's important for us to understand what's going to happen. And this takes the whole management team talking together. Okay, there has to be a good working relationship between the sales director and the revenue manager, the general manager, the rooms division, food and beverage, director of food and beverage. So all of those people have to come together to have good communication in order to decide, are we going to take this group or are we not? Okay, but ultimately the revenue manager is the one who starts everything off with creating this displacement analysis and quantifying, so putting a number with this opportunity to take a group or not. Any questions about that? No questions? Okay, so that concludes chapter 7. Be on the lookout for the quiz for parts 3 and 4. And then that will be due next week on Tuesday. And I will be logged in during class time, 10:45 to 12 on Thursday. So if you need to ask me questions about the quiz, you can do that. Any questions, comments, concerns overall for chapter 7? Because what's going to happen next is next week we'll start chapter 8. And we'll go over the final results for the displacement analysis in the chapter of the parts 3 and 4 quiz. And then following class next time, I want to make sure that you have the concepts of food and beverage down before you actually do an entire displacement analysis. So that's going to be next week. I'll assign an entire displacement analysis for you to complete on your own. And then make the assessment, do you take the group or do you not take the group? But I want to make sure you have the concepts of food and beverage down before you go into doing an entire displacement analysis. All right, so yes.
All right, I have a question that is to do with the homework, not so much this. But for the homework where we had to look at the 4 articles, there was one article that wasn't accessible anymore.
Okay, I will look at that. That actually, thanks for bringing that up. That actually goes with chapter 8. So we haven't done that yet. And so I realized a lot of y'all did it because the deadline was yesterday or today. And so I have updated the due date. So if you've already done that, then you're ahead of the game. If not, then I've extended the deadline for that once we've actually gone over that topic in class. Because ideally we would have gone over it today, and then that would have given people more time to go over that.